Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the history of another big and iconic guitar brand, although this time the brand in question is going to be Ibanez. Now I'm sure this is a company that you'll all be familiar with but might not necessarily know the backstory of, and in the process of researching this I found that actually it's a really interesting one. So let's not waste any more time and let's get straight into it. So to really go back to the very start of Ibanez, we don't need to go to Japan but instead to Spain. And our story starts in 1854 with a man by the name of Salvador Ibanez. Apologies, feel free to correct me in the comments if my pronunciation is wrong. I speak very little Spanish, so apologies. And the same goes for if there's any Japanese later on in this video, so just give me a break on that one. But Salvador Ibanez was a Spanish luthier, and he was a maker of guitars, ukuleles and mandolins. He first became a luthier's apprentice aged 11 and would go on to become known for his high quality instruments. Now I know some of you will be surprised to hear our story starts in Spain, but it's not until 1908 that we go over to Japan, and that takes us to the Hoshino Gaki company, which was set up initially to sell sheet music as a division of the Hoshino Shoten chain of bookstores, although Hoshino Gaki would very quickly transition into also selling musical instruments. In 1929 the company would start importing the Spanish guitars made by Ibanez. However, at this time the company was being run by his sons, as sadly Ibanez would have passed away in 1920, but his company continued on. He was aged 75 or 76. Exact dates for his birth and death can't be found, just the years. In 1935, Hoshino Gaki would decide to move from importing guitars to building their own, and they would begin making Spanish-style guitars, first using the name Ibanez Salvador, and then just Ibanez to honour the Spanish luthier. And this really is the start of what would become Ibanez as we know it today, and also why the change in the pronunciation happened. As you've hopefully noticed, this is just Hoshino Gaki producing guitars under this name. At this point, they have no connection to the original Spanish company, other than paying homage to the luthier himself with the name. It wouldn't be until 1957 where really we'd see the Ibanez we know today start to take shape, when they started producing electric guitars. And in the late 50s and 60s, Ibanez offered a range of often quite wild designs. And these were made in various factories around Japan, some of which you'll no doubt recognise the names of, and those factories included Kizo Suzuki, Gaia Tone, from 1962 onwards their own Tama factory, and later on in the 60s and 70s, very familiar names, Taisco and Fujigen. During the 1960s, Ibanez was a big player in what is come to be known as the lawsuit era. This was a period of time where Japanese manufacturers were making high quality copies of American-made guitars, predominantly Fenders, Gibsons and Rickenbackers. Now obviously because these were just straight copies, this led to the lawsuits, hence the name. But it became a real problem for the American manufacturers, as the Japanese manufacturers were able to make very faithful copies and high quality copies, whilst really undercutting the American-made guitars. But eventually the lawsuits would catch up with these companies, and that would force Ibanez eventually, post-lawsuit era, into making their own designs. It was around this time when you would see Ibanez start to produce some of their iconic designs, most of which I would say would be the Iceman, which was released in 1978. As we move into the 1980s, Ibanez has really started to pick up traction with a number of guitarists, a key one of which being Steve Vai. And this led to, in 1987, the Gem being released, and then in 1990, the Universe. And subsequently, as it was developed at the same time, in 1987, they would also release what I consider to be Ibanez's most recognisable and iconic model. Initially released as the Roadstar 2 series, but being renamed in 1992 to what we know it as today, that being the RG. As I've just said, the RGs were designed at the same time as the Gems in conjunction, and they were initially designed to be a more affordable version of the Gem. Although, as we know, as the years have come on, the RG has grown and grown and grown and really become its whole own thing, with various models at all sorts of different price points. As I said, the 1980s were a very popular time for Ibanez, and a lot of that would have to do with the massive rise in various genres such as hair metal, as well as a much higher general interest in a new shreddy sort of guitar technique which was popular at the time. As I'm sure you're aware, Ibanez is synonymous with this sort of shred, and players that play that sort of style gravitate towards these things because of things like the really thin wizard necks. Now, of course, since then Ibanez has only continued to expand and has released countless new series, including variations on the RG, such as the RGA and RGD models, as well as some very modern and innovative designs, such as things like the Q series, which released in 2021 and features a headless design. Although I haven't mentioned it thus far in this video, Ibanez is also a popular manufacturer of basses, with ranges such as the SR, BTB, the EHB headless series, which I'm a big fan of, as well as the Tauman series. And I previously mentioned Steve Vai, but obviously over the years their artist roster has also continued to grow and now includes artists such as Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, the guitarists from Korn, and Paul Gilbert. But what you might not know is their artist roster also features some less shred related or metal related players, including players such as George Benson, who plays a signature version of an Ibanez Artcore series guitar, which the Artcore series being a series of Jazzbox style guitars, which were first released in mid-2002. So that's a run through of the history of Ibanez. I've tried to keep this sort of fairly brief, as I always do in these videos, but give you the important points. And of course, as is often the case with these videos, Ibanez have so many different series and models of guitars that it was just impossible to mention them all, so I've just tried to really hit the key players here. But I hope this has shone some new light on the company for you. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.